around 60 degrees expected. It's 8 o'clock. This is Northern Light for Wednesday, June 26th. Good morning. I'm Monica Sandreski. Folks in the Thousand Islands met with U.S. Customs and Border Protection last night in Clayton. Residents, environmentalists, and politicians agree they don't like a federal plan to build a new facility at Blind Bay.
You know, I've never been to a meeting where it's unanimous. We don't want this. We don't want you building there. We respect our river. We respect the organizations that have the expertise to know this is the wrong place for you to build.
Also, the accidental death of a dairy farm worker shocked St. Lawrence County this month. We'll talk with Kitty O'Neill with the Cornell Cooperative Extension about the risks on farms and how to protect workers. Plus, the state may phase out Regents exams. Some education officials are praising the pivot, saying the exams only test a certain kind of smartness. Others say it will negatively impact students of color.
There's a reason why nearly every civil rights organization has supported annual assessments, because without standardized objective criteria, we don't end up knowing what students of color in particular, and students from low-income backgrounds, how schools are meeting the needs of those populations.
All that's coming up on Northern Light. Stick with us. Support for Northern Light here on North Country Public Radio comes from Mountain Orthotic and Prosthetic Services, a full-service practice committed to providing care for patients of all ages, with offices in Lake Placid, Plattsburgh, and Malone. Details and referrals at mountainonp.com. And by Blue Seed Studios, a multidisciplinary arts center featuring classes for adults and youth, concerts, art exhibits, and more. BLUseedstudios.org. This is Northern Light. I'm Monica Sandreski. More than 200 people came out in the Thousand Islands last night to show their opposition to a proposed new U.S. Customs and Border Protection facility on the St. Lawrence River. It would replace the current one on Wellesley Island. Border Patrol's plan to build in the relatively undeveloped Blind Bay has galvanized opposition from local residents, environmentalists, and even congresspeople on both sides of the aisle. Last night was the first public meeting about the proposal, and St. Lawrence Valley reporter Catherine Wheeler was there and joins us now. Catherine, good morning.
Good morning, Monica.
So why does U.S. Customs and Border Protection want to build on Blind Bay in the first place?
Basically, the feds say they've outgrown the current building. They're at 3 times higher capacity than it was originally built for. And they say renovating it isn't really an option because the building is eligible for the National Register of Historic Places. They say Blind Bay is more centrally located on the St. Lawrence River. But local environmentalists say Blind Bay is a delicate river habitat, and the new facility would mean dredging, light pollution, damage to plants and wildlife. And the Thousand Islands Land Trust owns the land and shore in question and opposes the plan. So the federal government would likely have to take it by eminent domain.
Well, so paint us a picture. What was the meeting like last night?
It was packed. The parking lot at the Ciro Recreation Arena in Clayton was completely full. People were decked out in Save Blind Bay T-shirts and stickers, and they had signs. There were booths set up outside. And at the beginning, people could walk around to tables where third-party federal contractors talked generally about the project, but many people said it left a lot to be desired. Some people I talked to at the event said they were disappointed that the actual decision-makers from CBP weren't there to talk. This is Carol Ann Jacobs, who says she's frustrated that she still doesn't know why Blind Bay is a preferred location.
The Customs and Border Patrol person that was here, the analogy that he used is that it's like when you go buy a house and, you know, you have requirements for your house that you want 4 bedrooms and 3 baths and et cetera. I said, yeah, but the difference here is that when I go buy a house and I see that I can't have 4 bedrooms and 3 baths, I don't double down and, you know, burn everybody else's house down so that I can have my 4-bedroom, 3-bath house where I want it. And that's what this process looks like to me.
But others said they did learn some things, particularly the details of a proposed alternate location at Dockside Cottages, which is just down the road from Blind Bay. It's even more residential there, and many people said they don't like that option either.
Well, so was there an opportunity for people to actually speak and give public comment?
Yes, and it was tense. This was the first time people have really gotten a chance to talk on the record about Blind Bay after years of uncertainty at this point. And many people got emotional. They pleaded with CBP not to develop this part of the shoreline in the Thousand Islands. And some people said their families have been coming here for generations, or they live here full time, and they don't want to see this development on the river. This is Julie Twitchell.
You know, I've never been to a meeting where it's unanimous. We don't want this. We don't want you building there. We respect our river. We respect the organizations that have the expertise to know this is the wrong place for you to build. So, you know, we're not going to stop and you're not going to win. So, you know, cut your losses. That's what I
said. There were lots of moments like this and even some standing ovations.
Well, so what's next for the plan?
So some people are hoping that this may be the start of some open dialogue and conversation about a new building location. North Country Assemblyman Scott Gray was there, and he advocated for this meeting and really wants to see CBP sit down with the community.
What we have to do here is hopefully we're just going to loosen that log jam up, and we're going to start having some conversations, and hopefully some alternate sites that we have in mind may come up and come forward, and then we think we can get everybody in the right direction for the right site that is both pleasing to the community and pleasing to the Board of Patrol.
There's another public open house tonight at the same place, the Ciro Recreation Arena in Clayton, and it's from 4 to 7 p.m. It will be the same format, and if people can't make it and want to comment on the proposal, they can do that through the mail or email, and you can find out where to send those at ncpr.org. That public comment period has been extended until July 12th.
Well, lots more to report on, Catherine. Thank you so much for coming on this morning.
Thanks, Monica.
You're listening to Northern Light right here on North Country Public Radio. It's just about 10 after 8. Good morning. I'm Monica Sandreski. So glad you could join us. Coming up on the program, we'll chat with Kitty O'Neill of the Cornell Cooperative Extension about farm safety and how to protect workers. That conversation in just a few minutes right here on Northern Light, which is supported by St. Lawrence Nurseries in Potsdam, providing the North Country with cold, hardy fruit and nut trees for over 100 years. slngrow.com. And by the North Country Children's Museum, Potsdam, with hands-on and minds-on exhibits and programs for children 12 and under and their families. Open Wednesday to Sunday, 10 to 5, northcountrychildrensmuseum.org. Music now by Caitlin Scholl out of Lake Placid. primaries yesterday in the North Country. In the highest profile one, Republican Congresswoman Claudia Tenney cruised to an easy victory over Mario Fratto in the heavy GOP district that stretches from Watertown to suburban Buffalo. Tenney won with 2/3 of the vote. In the race for the Democratic candidate for Plattsburgh mayor, County Legislator Wendell Hughes beat out Assistant District Attorney Dan Lennon 58 to 41%. Those are unofficial results. St. Lawrence, Hamilton, Lewis, and Franklin counties didn't have any primaries at all. Tour boats that have been stuck for months behind a damaged bridge in Kingston, Ontario, were finally released into the St. Lawrence River late last week. The LaSalle Causeway was damaged during maintenance back in March and was closed to all traffic. That prevented some larger tour boats from leaving the harbor, and it also blocked all car and foot traffic. According to the Kingston Whig Standard, construction crews demolished the portion of the bridge that swings open to let boats through. According to the paper, the 3-month-long closure hurt the city's early summer tourism season and potentially causing tens of millions of dollars in lost revenue. The LaSalle Causeway remains closed to all car and foot traffic. It's unclear when it will fully reopen. Homeowners in Ogdensburg say raw sewage came up into their basements after a big rainstorm last week. According to WWNY-TV, the storm nearly overwhelmed Ogdensburg's new $42 million wastewater treatment facility. During the storm, about 6,000 gallons of water was pumping into the facility per minute. Several people shared stories at Monday night city council meeting of raw sewage spewing into their homes after the storm. Ogdensburg City Council members said they will contact the State Department of Health and look into solving the sewage issue. New York State has set aside $15 million to help communities manage their use of road salt. According to a recent state report, an estimated 580 million pounds of road salt is used in the Adirondacks each winter. That salt has contaminated waterways around the region, as well as drinking water sources. The $15 million in state funding is aimed at limiting contamination from road salt through the construction of new salt storage sheds and more strategic salting tools and techniques. The deadline for communities to apply for a state grant to manage their road salt use is July 31st. And the city of Plattsburgh is changing course on a major downtown development project. Kara Chapman has more.
Plattsburgh was one of the first communities to receive a $10 million downtown revitalization initiative grant several years ago. More than $4 million was awarded to Prime Plattsburgh LLC. The company planned to build a mixed-use development with more than 100 apartments on the current Durkee Street parking lot downtown. But the project faced opposition from a group of local business owners and residents called the Plattsburgh Citizens Coalition. The coalition sued to stop the project and won. The Clinton County Supreme Court tossed out permit approvals in 2022. The city appealed, but an appellate court handed down the same result last year. The city decided to next take the fight to the Court of Appeals, which is the state's highest court. But Mayor Chris Rosenquist said in a statement yesterday that some news from Prime changed things. The mayor says Prime reached out confirming that it's still interested in a project, but not the specific one pending litigation. Essentially, the developer is abandoning the original project, so now the city is abandoning its appeal. Rosenquist says the city doesn't have all the details yet for the new project. He says the city is confident that Prime and the state are, quote, ready and excited to pursue a development opportunity that would fulfill the goals of continuing the revitalization efforts of our downtown. Rosenquist says it's a second chance the city cannot afford to miss. Kara Chapman, North Country Public Radio.
Regents exams could soon be optional for New York high schoolers. The State Department of Education is proposing a plan to change requirements to obtain a high school diploma. Lucas Willard of the New York Public News Network has more.
The New York State Education Department's plan would transform how graduating students are assessed. State Education Commissioner Betty Rosa began working on the mission to reimagine graduation requirements in 2019 when she was a Regents chancellor. Rosa, a former superintendent, says the proposed requirements aim to create true equity in education.
I think that our educational system, in many ways, really responds to a certain group of students, and yet it doesn't do a good job in bringing along some of our students that have a different way of absorbing and learning and demonstrating what they know.
The first area of transformation is to adopt what's called the New York State Portrait of a Graduate, a set of criteria that includes critical thinking, problem-solving, cultural and social-emotional competency, and more.
We truly want our kids to innovate. We want them to be inspired. We want them to think about opportunities, possibilities. We want them to be, even when they read journal pieces, media pieces that are out there, we want them to be critical thinkers.
Other key recommendations of the proposal include redefining credits to focus on proficiency rather than completion of a time-based system, sunsetting diploma assessment requirements, no longer requiring all students pass the standardized Regents exams to graduate, and moving to one diploma. Districts would still be allowed to recognize students who go beyond required coursework with special seals or endorsements. Jamie Safone, Executive Vice President of New York State United Teachers, says the state's largest teachers union supports all four proposals.
When you really look at what these project-based learning opportunities do is they make those real-world connections. They deepen vocabulary in content. And I think it's really important for people to know that this is not about lowering standards. It's really about meeting our students where they're at.
The recommendations were developed by a body of stakeholders called the New York State Blue Ribbon Commission on Graduation Measures. Jay Warona, Deputy Executive Director and General Counsel for the New York State School Boards Association, praised the state's approach.
There were students, there were, parents, there were school board members, there were superintendents. And I think that, my understanding of talking to many of these people is that this was not preordained by the state education department. This is what the education community came up with in terms of what would be best for students. And that to me, is democracy in the making, and that sounds like a good idea to me.
Arlen Benjamin Gomez, Executive Director of the Education Trust New York, says the group is largely in support of three of the core tenets, but does have concerns with the proposal to sunset the Regents exam requirement.
So removing the one objective statewide standard is very concerning. And there's a reason why nearly every civil rights organization has supported annual assessments in the federal ESSA requirements, for example, because we know that without some sort of standardized objective criteria, we don't end up knowing what students of color in particular and students from low-income backgrounds are, how schools are meeting the needs of those populations and how we can target resources for them.
Commissioner Rosa says the plan is to allow Regents exams to be at the table in assessing students, but not to take center stage.
The example I always use is that when you go to the doctor doesn't just do one exam, right? Before they say we're going to need surgery, right? They go through a battery. And so we want to do the same thing. We want to make sure that we are measuring all the elements and that we're coming up with a composite that makes sense.
The Education Department is planning a series of forums this summer to gather feedback on the transformation plan. Rosa also acknowledges there are a lot of unknowns related to implementation.
We have to come up with strategic planning. We have to create a strategic plan for this endeavor. And we also know that there are going to be unforeseen consequences that we have to grapple with. And so we are prepared to do that. But we're also, this train has left the station. It's on the road. And we hope that by the time the regions look at the timeline and look at what comes next in terms of the implementation, that we're in a good place with our communities.
The State Education Department is scheduled to present an implementation plan to the Board of Regents in November. Until a new system of graduation requirements is approved by the board, existing requirements will remain in effect for New York public schools. In Albany, I'm Lucas Willard for the New York Public News Network.
This is North Country Public Radio. It's 8:20. You're listening to Northern Light right here on North Country Public Radio. Good morning. I'm Monica Sandreski. Coming up in just a minute, a conversation with Kitty O'Neill of the Cornell Cooperative Extension. She joins us every month to update us on what's going on in agriculture in the North Country. Then stick around after the show for Bird Note, coming up at 8:42. First, we got to take a look at the weather forecast. At last check, it was 68 degrees in Chateauguay, 69 in Chameau, 70 degrees in Rouse's Point and in Alberg, 66 degrees in Paul Smith with some light rain there, 72 degrees down in Glens Falls already. We can expect partly to mostly sunny skies with temperatures rising into the mid-70s and in higher elevations into the mid-80s in the rest of the region. Overnight tonight, a chance of showers and lows in the mid-50s to about 60 degrees, depending on where you are. Chance of isolated showers tomorrow, too, with highs in the mid-70s in lower elevations, highs in the 60s in the high peaks expected, and mostly sunny skies as we head into Friday. Well, safety is important in every profession. Farm workers in the North Country have felt that acutely this month after fatal accidents on 2 farms. And here to talk with us about the risks of inherent in farming and measures to protect workers is Kitty O'Neill. She's an agricultural climate resiliency specialist with the Cornell Cooperative Extension. She joins us every month to keep us up to date on what's going on in agriculture in the North Country. Kitty, good morning.
Good morning, Monica.
Well, this is a sobering topic this morning, for sure. And I wonder if, to start out, if you could lay out what happened in these 2 accidents.
Well, I know mostly what you know from news reports. I don't have any special inside information. But what I understand is a young worker here in the North Country was killed attempting to manage a cow-calf situation, a newborn calf and cow. This is always a tense moment for the cow. They are often anxious and nervous when people approach a new calf, and workers know this. But I think this is kind of a rare incident, nonetheless. It's one that workers certainly would be aware of as a possibility, but I don't think this kind of accident. When I looked into the statistics, I didn't see this kind of accident listed very hardly. Well, I didn't see it at all, so it can't be super common. The other accident that happened in central New York last week was a case that we do see, unfortunately, too often. A case where 2 workers were working around a manure tanker, and I understand a tool was dropped in. And one worker attempted to retrieve the tool, I think, and then this happens too often. The first worker passed out. The second worker wanted to rescue the first one, and then he passed out. And so this is one of those things we see on farms every once in a while. When there's a manure gas accident, it often claims more than one person because of the impulse. Even though we know, everyone knows and has been trained and is aware, the impulse to retrieve the tool and save the person is very strong.
Yeah. Yes. And we do know that both of those incidents are under investigation right now. And like you'd said, I was reading that like the Farm Safety Association talks about, like you're saying, with the gases that decomposing manure can produce, like methane and ammonia and
hydrogen sulfide is the dangerous one. And usually that is, we know that is a serious risk, and safety steps need to be taken in enclosed spaces when working around manure, or even enclosed silos shortly after they're filled. The same kind of thing can happen. There's a lot of training, a lot of safety measures. We know that, it's a good idea to use a respirator if you're going to be in some of those, if you plan to be in some of those situations. But then in the moment, a lot of times, it's human nature. Well, it'll only take me a second to just grab that tool or to, I need to pull out my colleague that just fell in, right? How could, that would be so difficult to walk away, to save yourself, even though you know better, right? And I think that's what probably happens. Human nature is still in play.
Right. Right. Well, can we take a step back for a second just to to zoom out and sort of, can you give us a sense of how dangerous farm work is?
It's very dangerous. Farm work is one of the more dangerous occupations in the U.S. I looked up some statistics the other day. Just in 2022, there were about 5,500 workplace fatalities nationwide across all kinds of work. About 418 of them were in agriculture, forestry, fishing, and hunting. That's a little less than 10%, about 8%. In New York State, there were 168. 168 of those deaths were in New York State, and 18 of those were on farms, which is a little higher, 11%. So that's in 1 year. And looking at other years, it looks like there's between 10 and 20 deaths on farms a lot of times in New York State, a lot of years. That's sort of a ballpark number. Yeah. And that's one of the highest rates of accidents and fatalities at work for any profession. The other professions that are near the top are healthcare work and warehousing. Yeah. And but farm work is at the top. Yep.
Yeah, and you were saying that there's been like this downward trend.
It is, right. It's always improving, but, it's one of those things where everyone's goal would be zero workplace injuries and fatalities, but we have a long way to go to get there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and how have laws evolved about farm safety? Like for years, farms were sort of carved out of worker safety regulations because they were considered like family farms. But now farms have gotten bigger and more mechanized. And how have the laws kept up with that?
So there has been a lot of advancing of safety regulations that are implemented and enforced on farms. For example, we all see those orange triangles on the back of slow-moving vehicles, right? Right. I don't know when that came to be, but sometime back maybe in the 70s, 60s, 70s. That's an OSHA thing, right? We all know OSHA, occupational safety and or occupational health and safety, is a part of the Department of Labor. Its existence is to protect workers. So there's a lot of regulations. And some farms are exempted from some of those regulations. It doesn't really go by farm size necessarily, but by whether or not a farm employs non-family employees. So in other words, if it's entirely a family of employees, then there are some regulations that don't apply to them. But if they employ others, then there's a full set of OSHA regulations and other things. There has to be on-farm trainings. There has to be posters reminding farm workers of different safety practices and procedures. There's certain equipment designs that have to be used, right? We're all more familiar now, I think, with various implements where if you let go of the handle, it shuts off. That didn't used to be a thing, right? But that's more common now. And then, I don't know, anecdotally, I grew up in a farming community, and there were several people in the community that were missing a finger or an arm or, a hand or something when I was a kid. And fortunately, I don't think we come across that as often now. That said, it's still very dangerous, and there are still a lot of things to be aware of, risks. And we all have risks in our lives. It's just that the consequences, I think, are huger on a farm. You don't just slip and cut your finger while you're making a bagel, right? You back a machine into a building, or it's a scale.
Yeah. Well, and also we've reported a lot over the years about the hundreds of mostly Latino people working illegally on North Country dairy farms. I mean, how does that situation affect their ability to speak out about unsafe working conditions?
So I think this is a delicate situation. I think we could do a lot more from the top down to clean up the whole regulatory system so that when something happens, every worker feels safe to say something about it, receive treatment for it, without risk of some kind of repercussion. I don't know that we're there yet. There's a lot of work to be done. I do think, though, that we are definitely moving in the right direction. There's a lot of support for the worker situation on farms. Everyone, I think, is beginning to understand from the top to the bottom how